It's our second heat wave of the summer, and I'm just back from a holiday in Spain, and they've had their worst year of forest fires since records began. Over 200,000 hectares has been burnt, which is the equivalent of a landmass of Leicestershire in the UK or County Wicklow in Ireland, being completely lost to fire. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Tom Tayler from our Sustainable Finance Centre for Excellence here in Aviva Investors. Tom, the E of ESG is probably the biggest factor that investors relate to. And as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of easy to see why as we sit here in another summer heat wave. But is this really any different from what's happened before? We've had heat waves in 1955, 1976 is one that's talked about a lot. We have, even 2013. Are these just infrequent events that happen every now and again, or is there something more systemic going on here?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think there's definitely something more systemic going on. You can look at maps that show, for example, like you mentioned 76, you can look at a map of global temperatures around 76, and there's this hotspot around Northern Europe that led to the heat wave that went on that summer. Whereas now, there's a lot more red all across the world. That map is very, very different. So this is a systemic change, and we're seeing not just occasional heat waves. The last 7 years are the hottest 7 years on record, and this year is almost certainly going to be 8 from 8. So this is a big shift, and we haven't just got the difference between one year and the next. We've got a big, gradual but permanent change going on.
Okay, so without this becoming a science lesson, why do carbon emissions matter? What are they doing to our world? In just without it becoming a complete science lesson, how's that impacting things?
I mean, in simple terms, greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide principally, but there are others like methane, which in the short term are much more potent. They act like a duvet around the world. They trap warm air and don't let it out. And the graph of increasing emissions versus increasing temperatures, the two almost perfectly overlay each other. The more emissions we put into the atmosphere, the warmer things get. If we stop putting emissions into the world, temperatures are going to stabilize pretty quickly.
Okay, so as we've seen, the world, as you've just mentioned, is continuing to increase in temperature. We hear an awful lot of promises made from countries and from companies to ensure temperatures don't rise. But how are we doing? So
we're doing pretty well for promises. We've got a lot of those. We're doing a far worse when it comes to actually delivering on them. So we pretty much all know where we need to get to now. And it's a question of actually putting into practice those pledges. So temperatures are continuing to rise. Emissions continue to rise. 2021 saw the second biggest rise in emissions in history at a time that we need to cut emissions in half by the end of the decade to have any hope of net zero by 2050. So action needs to match up to words to actually get us to where we need to be, and we're quite a long way off track at the moment.
Okay, so I think lots of us are very aware of the lifestyle changes that we kind of need to make to reduce our own carbon footprint, moving to an electric car or moving to renewable energy. But what can we in the investment industry do about it? Can we actually make a difference?
Yeah, we really can. I mean, it's incredibly important to match that scale of what we need to do with real hope that an agency that we can make a difference. So all of those individual actions that you talk about that people do, they send huge demand signals to the economy for what we need and what people want to do. And the investment industry has huge power and huge scale. So there's more than $300 trillion worth of assets under management across the world. That means there's enough money to solve this crisis. It's just a problem that it's flowing to the wrong places at the moment. And so as investors, we have a variety of ways that we can positively play our part in solving this crisis. And in a crisis, everybody needs to do their bit. So we can allocate to and offer investments to clients that have support for solutions providers. So, for example, a company like Vestas that makes wind turbines, we need to shift from a a fossil fuel-based energy mix to a renewable energy mix. That sort of company is the sort of company we can invest in. But equally, we've got companies that need to evolve, that need to transition their business models. And we've got a role in encouraging them to do that, holding their feet to the fire, asking for robust plans for how a company is going to play a role in the future low carbon economy. So, for example, in vehicles, we know we're going to have a shift to electric vehicles. So we need to see how a company like, say, VW has a plan to evolve the cars it produces to meet that demand. And then the expertise and the influence of the investment industry can help governments. Governments are the ones who ultimately have the biggest levers to solve these problems. But we can help, and we can engage them and say these are the sort of enabling regulations and laws we need to help us meet our own net zero pledges. So we can talk to governments about the need to price carbon to drive incentives to transition. We can talk about the way that the finance system needs to be reformed, with the financial architecture evolving to meet the kind of challenges that we face in this generation. And we have a big role in doing that. So there are all sorts of ways that we can really make a difference and really need to collectively as an industry.
Tom, that's really, really interesting. Clear to me, we still have a long way to go on this. As we sit here in sweltering temperatures, it certainly provides a very clear focus on the need to do more. And clearly, as you've just mentioned, we in the investment industry can clearly make a difference too. Tom, many thanks for your time today. I find that really interesting. And we will be back next week to cover another topic that's caught our eye.